Nah, my daughter-in-law walked out of my house at 2 in the morning carrying a leather portfolio case I had never seen before. She moved quickly, shoulders hunched against the February cold, and she did not look back. I watched from the upstairs window, my hand pressed flat against the glass, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. The thing I had been sensing for weeks had finally shown itself. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are right now. My name is Gerald, and I spent 34 years as a forensic accountant with the Canada Revenue Agency in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I retired at 62 with a pension, a clear conscience, and a house on Beaumont Avenue that my wife Helen and I had paid off together. Helen passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 11 weeks from diagnosis, and the house became something different after that. Quieter, heavier, full of her absence in every room. When my son Daniel suggested that he and his wife Renata move in to help me through the grief, I said yes without hesitating. They had been struggling financially. Daniel had left a stable government job to start a landscaping business that never quite took off, and Renata was between contracts doing bookkeeping remotely. I had space. They needed support. It seemed like the right thing. That was 28 months before the night I watched Renata walk to her car in the dark with that portfolio case. She had been in the house all evening. I had gone to bed early with a headache, leaving them watching television in the living room. When the sound of the side door woke me, I checked the clock, 2:17 in the morning. I watched her load the case into her trunk, stand there for a moment in the cold air, then drive away with her lights off until she reached the end of the street. I went back to bed, but I did not sleep. In the morning I waited until Daniel left for an estimate appointment, and then I went to my home office. Everything looked undisturbed at first. My desk was tidy, the filing cabinet closed, the bookshelf in order. Then I noticed the small combination lockbox I kept on the bottom shelf, tucked behind a row of tax reference manuals. It was slightly forward, pulled out from the shelf. Not much, maybe 2 inches, but I had placed it flush against the back wall the last time I opened it, a habit from decades of working with documents that needed to stay exactly where I left them. I lifted it. It felt right. I entered the combination and opened it. Everything appeared to be there. My late father's silver pocket watch, the one he carried every day of his working life in the Cape Breton mines. An envelope containing $3,000 in emergency cash I kept on hand, since Helen's illness taught me that banks are not always accessible when you need them most, and a USB drive holding scanned copies of my most important documents. I closed it, set it back flush against the wall, and stood there very still for a moment. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way I used to feel discrepancies in financial statements before I could name them. A pressure behind the eyes, a wrongness in the pattern. I opened the lockbox again and picked up the USB drive. I carried it to my computer and plugged it in. The folder structure was intact, but when I opened the folder labeled EST8 documents and checked the file properties, I saw that 3 files had been accessed 4 days ago at 11:43 in the evening. I had not touched that drive in 6 weeks. The files that had been opened were my current will, my investment account statements from TD Wealth, and the deed to the house. I unplugged the drive, set it on my desk, and sat with my hands folded for a long time. I had been a forensic accountant. I knew what it looked like when someone was building a picture of what a person owned. At dinner that evening, I watched them both carefully. Daniel talked about a new contract, a commercial property in Dartmouth that might carry him through spring. He seemed genuinely pleased. Renata was quieter than usual, cutting her chicken into small pieces and rearranging them. When I asked about her remote contracts, she said things were steady. She met my eyes for exactly the right amount of time, not too long, not too short, and I recognized that too. I had interviewed enough people over the years to know when someone had practiced their composure. I said nothing. I did what I always did when I suspected something. I began to gather evidence. Over the following days, I paid attention to things I had previously let pass. Renata took phone calls in the backyard regardless of temperature, standing in her coat near the fence, speaking in a low voice. She had started shredding paper in the recycling bin rather than using the household shredder, which meant she did not want the shredded material in the house. She was also spending money, small amounts, nothing dramatic, but new purchases appearing, a new laptop bag, subscription charges on the shared grocery account that did not correspond to groceries. When I reviewed the household expense account I had set up for shared costs, I found 3 transfers to a bank account I did not recognize, each for $400, spaced 2 weeks apart. I did not confront them. I documented everything. 2 weeks after the night I had watched Renata leave with the portfolio case, I drove to a small electronics shop on Göttingen Street and bought a home security camera, the kind designed to monitor indoor spaces. In Nova Scotia, recording in your own home on your own property is entirely legal. I installed it in the hallway near the kitchen, angled to capture the main living area. It was small enough to disappear into the bookshelf decoration. I reviewed the footage each morning before they woke. Most of it was unremarkable. Daniel eating cereal and scrolling his phone. Renata doing yoga in the living room. On the 4th day, I captured what I needed. Daniel was in the kitchen making coffee. Renata came in from the hallway, glanced toward the stairs, and said quietly, "He still doesn't know. We have time before the renewal date. As long as we move before then, it won't matter." Daniel set down his mug. "Are you sure the transfer went through?" She nodded. "The second one cleared yesterday. By the time he figures out the account statements don't match, we'll have enough to cover the deposit on the Moncton place." I played it back 4 times. I transcribed every word into a notebook I labeled with the date and timestamp. Then I called a retired colleague, a woman named Beverly who had spent 20 years in financial investigations before moving to private practice. I did not tell her everything. I told her I had reason to believe someone had accessed financial accounts in my name without authorization and that I needed to understand the scope of what might have happened. She recommended a trust and estate lawyer named Patricia Okafor, whose office was on Spring Garden Road in downtown Halifax. "Sharp, precise," Beverly said. "She doesn't waste time." Before I called Patricia, I spent 3 evenings reconstructing what Renata had accessed. I pulled every account statement, cross-referenced the document access dates with my actual transaction history, and discovered something that made the room feel smaller. 2 months earlier, my investment account at TD Wealth had been accessed online from a device I did not own. A single transaction had been initiated, a transfer request for $22,000, but it had been flagged by the bank's fraud detection system and suspended pending identity verification. I had received an automated email at the time that I had dismissed as routine phishing, something I was embarrassed to admit to myself now. I had not called the bank. I had deleted the email. The transfer had not gone through, but it had been attempted. I called TD Wealth the next morning, identified myself, and spoke with their fraud investigation unit. The representative confirmed the attempted transfer, confirmed it had been suspended, and confirmed that the device used to initiate it was not associated with my account profile. They filed an internal report. I requested a full access log going back 18 months and received it within 48 hours. I drove to Patricia Okafor's office on a Wednesday afternoon with a briefcase containing printed account statements, the TD Wealth access log, a copy of my USB drive's file access history, the transcribed recording, and 3 months of household expense account records with the unidentified transfers highlighted. Patricia was in her late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the unhurried efficiency of someone who had seen every version of family financial conflict that existed. She reviewed my materials without comment for 20 minutes while I sat across the desk and waited. She looked up. "Mr. MacNeil, you have documented evidence of unauthorized account access and attempted fraudulent transfer of funds and what appears to be ongoing diversion of household funds to an undisclosed account. You also have a recorded conversation indicating awareness of a plan to relocate before discovery." She set her pen down. "This is a comprehensive file. You built this yourself?" 34 years with the CRA, I said. "Financial irregularities are my first language." She almost smiled. "Then you already know what I'm going to recommend." She walked me through the options. Criminal complaint to the RCMP for fraud and unauthorized use of computer systems under the Criminal Code of Canada. Civil recovery action for the diverted funds. And simultaneously, the part I had been turning over in my mind since the night I had watched Renata drive away in the dark, a revision of my estate documents. Under Nova Scotia law, I could revise my will at any time without cause or explanation. My current will left the house and the majority of my estate to Daniel, with provisions for any future grandchildren. I had written it 2 years after Helen died, when Daniel was still the son I thought I knew. Patricia drafted the new will over the following week. When I reviewed it, the language was clean and deliberate. My estate, the house on Beaumont Avenue, assessed at $610,000. My TD Wealth investment portfolio of approximately $380,000, my pension survivor benefits, and my personal property would pass to the Brigadoon Children's Camp Society, a Nova Scotia charity that had meant a great deal to Helen. She had volunteered there every summer for 9 years. Daniel and Renata would each receive $1 with explicit language stating the nominal amount was intentional and did not reflect oversight. I read the clause about intentionality 3 times. Then I signed it. The notary appointment was at a small office in Bedford. Patricia was present. The notary, a careful man named Thomas, asked the required questions in the flat, professional tone of someone who had witnessed thousands of signatures. Was I acting voluntarily? Was I of sound mind and free from undue influence? I answered both questions clearly and without hesitation. I was 67 years old. I had worked with numbers and documentation for 3 decades. My mind was sharper than it had ever been, sharpened now by fury that I kept perfectly controlled, because fury without control is just noise. The pen pressed into the page. The notary's seal came down. I drove home and made dinner. Daniel had brought takeout from a Lebanese restaurant on Quinpool Road that we all liked. We ate at the kitchen table, and he told a story about a difficult client in Dartmouth. And Renata laughed in the right places, and I passed the hummus, and listened, and said nothing. 3 days later, I filed the complaint with the RCMP. The officer who took my report was a financial crimes investigator named Constable Theriot, a methodical woman who asked precise questions and did not rush. I gave her everything: the TD Wealth Access Log, the account statements, the expense account records, the transcribed recording with the timestamp and audio file on a USB drive. She reviewed it with the focused attention of someone used to separating signal from noise. "This is well organized," she said. "Old habit," I said. She told me investigations of this nature took time. She would review the materials, consult with the Financial Crimes Unit, and be in touch within 2 weeks. I gave her my contact information and drove home in the late afternoon light, with a particular clarity that comes from having done something that cannot be undone. That evening, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea and listened to the street sounds. The neighborhood was ordinary and familiar. A dog barking 2 houses over, someone's recycling bin rolling in the wind. I had lived on this street for 22 years. Helen had planted the lilac bushes along the fence. They would bloom again in May. The weeks that followed required a patience I had spent a career developing. I maintained everything as before. I joined Daniel for hockey games on Saturday nights, something we had done together since he was 12 years old. I asked Renata about her remote work and listened to her answers with what I hoped looked like ordinary interest. Once, over coffee on a Sunday morning, she looked at me in a way that was slightly too long, slightly too careful, and I understood that she was watching me the same way I was watching her. We were 2 people conducting parallel investigations across a kitchen table. Constable Theriot called at the end of February. The RCMP had reviewed the materials and confirmed sufficient grounds to proceed. The attempted transfer had been traced to a device registered to Renata through a cellular account. The unidentified bank account receiving the household fund transfers was registered to a numbered company with Renata listed as the sole director. Formal charges were being prepared for fraud over $5,000, an unauthorized use of a computer system under Sections 380 and 342(1) of the Criminal Code. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and sat in my office for a long moment. Then I called Patricia and told her we were ready for the next phase. Patricia's approach was precise. She had learned through her own professional network that Renata was a member of a Halifax small business bookkeeping association that held monthly networking breakfasts at a hotel on Hollis Street. Patricia arranged to attend one of these breakfasts on a Wednesday morning in early March, conducting a meeting with a colleague at a corner table. During the meeting, a folder containing a copy of my revised will was visible on the table. Not open, not conspicuous, just present in the way that working documents exist on the surfaces of people who work with documents. Patricia stepped away to refill her coffee at the buffet. The folder remained on the table. Renata, crossing the room, passed the table. She saw the name on the folder tab, MacNeil Estate, Will Revision. I was told afterward that she stood there for 4 seconds, then she picked up her phone. That evening she was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. Her color was wrong. Too flat, the way people look when they are processing something that has rearranged their understanding of their situation. She poured herself a glass of water and didn't drink it. When I said good evening, she said good evening back, and looked at a point slightly past my left ear. Daniel came home an hour later. They went upstairs. I heard the low wall of their voices for 20 minutes, then silence. At breakfast the next morning, Daniel came into the kitchen before Renata. He poured coffee and stood at the counter. He did not sit down. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk about your will." I looked up from my newspaper. "Oh?" "Renata saw a document at a business thing yesterday. He was working hard to keep his voice even. It looked like you made changes, serious changes, without telling us." "I made changes that reflect my current intentions," I said. "That's what wills are for. You're cutting us out." His voice moved up slightly. "After everything, we moved here to help you. We've been here for 2 years. We gave up our apartment. We put our own plans on hold." I set down my newspaper. "Daniel, I know about the TD account." The color left his face. "I know about the numbered company. I know about the transfers. I know about the device that was used to attempt a $22,000 transfer from my investment portfolio. I know about the Moncton apartment. I have documented all of it and I have shared all of it with the appropriate people." He sat down heavily. Renata appeared in the doorway. She looked at Daniel's face and something behind her eyes went very still. I reached into the kitchen drawer and placed 2 envelopes on the table, one for each of them. "You are being asked to vacate this property within 60 days, I said. "There is no lease. Nova Scotia's Residential Tenancies Act does not require cause for a licensee who was given informal permission to reside." Patricia's office prepared the notices. "Everything is in order." Renata picked up her envelope. Her hands were steady, which I noted. "And the other things?" she asked, which told me she understood exactly what I meant. "The RCMP will contact you directly," I said. The weeks following had a quality of gray endurance that I did not try to rush. Daniel hired a lawyer, a young man who called Patricia's office twice with procedural objections that went nowhere. Renata initially tried to characterize the TD access as a misunderstanding, a shared device, a confusion about account permissions. The RCMP investigator was not interested in that characterization. The numbered company, the transfer timing, and the device registration records made the documentation straightforward. They fought the will revision first. Daniel's lawyer filed on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity, which I found almost amusing. Patricia presented my CRA employment record, my pension documentation, a letter from my family physician confirming full cognitive function, and a sworn affidavit from Thomas the notary. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. The judge found no basis to proceed and dismissed the petition. Outside the courthouse, Daniel looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing a jacket I recognized. I had given it to him for his birthday 2 years ago, the October before all of this began. He looked at me across the concrete steps and I looked back and there was nothing useful to say, so we said nothing. The civil recovery action was simpler. The numbered company records and the bank statements established the diverted amounts clearly. Patricia filed for recovery of $3,600 in redirected household funds plus legal costs. The matter was uncontested. Renata did not file a defense. The judgment was entered without a hearing. The criminal proceedings moved at the pace of criminal proceedings, which is to say slowly and with intervals of waiting that I filled with my regular life. I volunteered 2 afternoons a week at a settlement services organization on Dottingen Street, that helped newcomers to Nova Scotia navigate financial and government systems. The work was familiar and useful. I cooked real dinners again, the kind that take an hour and fill the house with smell. I called my sister in Sydney, Cape Breton, more often than I had in years. Renata entered a guilty plea to the fraud charge in early June. Fraud under $5,000, reduced from the original charge in exchange for the plea, 2 years of probation, a permanent criminal record. The unauthorized computer access charge was stayed as part of the agreement. Her lawyer presented circumstances to the court: no prior record, financial stress, regret. The judge acknowledged the circumstances and imposed the conditional sentence. I attended the hearing but did not speak. I was not asked to. I sat in the gallery and watched the process work the way it was designed to work, slowly and imperfectly, and finally, Daniel was not charged. He had known, I was sure of it. The kitchen conversation Renata had referenced made that clear, but knowing and participating are different things under the law, and the evidence of his direct involvement was not sufficient to proceed. He called me once, in April, from a number I didn't recognize because he knew I would answer an unknown number where I would not have answered his. He said he was sorry. He said he had let her convince him that it would be temporary, that they would pay it back before I noticed, that it wasn't really stealing. He said he knew that wasn't good enough. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I said, "I know you believe you're sorry. I don't know yet what that means for us." I hung up. I wasn't ready. I didn't know if I would be. The eviction was completed on the last Friday of April. A moving truck arrived in the morning. They worked steadily, and I stayed in my office with the door open, not watching, but present. In the early afternoon, Renata came to my office doorway. She stood there for a moment, and I waited. "I didn't think it was real," she said. "I didn't let myself think it was real, what I was doing." "The problem," I said, "is that it was real, whether you let yourself think so or not." She nodded. Left. The sound of the truck doors closing came through my window at 3:15. I heard the engine. I heard it fade down the street. I sat in the quiet of my house for a long time. Later I went through each room the way I had always done after Helen died, taking inventory of the silence. The guest room, stripped to the mattress. The bathroom with its empty counter. The kitchen, clean and fully mine again. I stood at the window and looked at Helen's lilac bushes along the fence. They were 2 weeks from blooming. That evening, I took my father's pocket watch from the lockbox, wound it the way he had shown me when I was 9 years old. 3 turns clockwise, firm but not forced, and set it on the kitchen table beside my dinner. The watch was silver, worn smooth on the back from 40 years in his pocket, engraved with his initials and a date I had always taken to mean his wedding year. He had worked underground for 30 years in those mines, and he had come home every evening and wound that watch and set it on the dresser. It was the most reliable thing I knew about him. I thought about what Renata had been building toward the Moncton apartment, the deposit fund, the slow accumulation of my money into a departure plan. I thought about Daniel knowing and staying silent. I thought about 28 months of dinners and hockey games and shared grocery runs, all of it occurring on top of a version of reality I had not been shown. I was not interested in grief about it. I had grieved enough things. I was interested in what came next. In August, a letter arrived in a plain envelope with Daniel's handwriting on the front. He had moved to a rented room in Dartmouth, he said. He and Renata had separated. He was doing some contract work, smaller jobs, not the Dartmouth commercial project, which had fallen through. He wrote that he was not asking for anything. He just wanted me to know where he was. I read the letter twice. I set it in the drawer of my desk, the same drawer where I kept the documents from the legal proceedings, not discarded, but not answered. Some things need more time than a letter can carry. What I know is this: my house is mine. My father's watch is on my wrist. The lilac bushes bloomed in May, the same purple they have been for 15 years, reliable as anything. I volunteer on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I cook dinner and eat it at the kitchen table with the radio on. The quiet is mine, and I have learned to receive it as the thing it actually is, which is not loneliness, but freedom. I spent 34 years tracking the movement of money through systems designed to obscure it. I know what a trail looks like. I know what it means when the numbers don't add up. And I know that the people who forget this, who assume that 67 means slow, that grief means vulnerable, that trust means naive, they always, without exception, underestimate what a patient person is capable of. That is not a threat. It's just a fact. My father's watch is proof of it. Time tests your principles, he used to say. The watch just helps you remember to hold on. If this story stayed with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what time it is where you are and what part of this story hit closest to home. Click the box on the left for the next story. Thank you for being here. There is a particular kind of pain that comes not from what someone takes, but from who they turn out to be. When I watched my daughter-in-law drive away in the dark carrying evidence of what she had been doing quietly for months, I did not feel rage. I felt the specific weight of having trusted someone with proximity to everything I had built and discovering that the trust had been used as a tool against me. What happened to me, and what happened to Renata and Daniel as a result, was not a matter of luck running one way or another. It was cause and consequence, playing out exactly as it always does when the choices we make accumulate into the shape of our character. Renata made a series of decisions, each one small enough to feel manageable, each one building on the last until the structure of what she was doing could not be hidden. Daniel made the choice to know and stay silent, which is its own kind of decision. And I made the choice to pay attention, to document, to be patient, and to act through the proper channels rather than through anger. Each of us received the result our choices were building toward. I think about this often now, not because I am bitter, but because I find it clarifying. We do not always control what happens around us, but we have more control over our response than we usually admit. The discipline to observe before acting, to build a case rather than make a scene, to trust the systems designed for exactly this kind of situation. That discipline did not appear from nowhere. It came from 34 years of doing careful work, from a life that required me to think precisely under pressure, from the habit of asking what the evidence actually shows rather than what I wanted to show. That is the honest version of the lesson I carry from this. The qualities that protected me were not special gifts, they were practices. Patience is a practice. Clear thinking under emotional pressure is a practice. The willingness to sit with difficult knowledge and wait for the right moment. That is something you build, slowly, over years of choosing it when it would be easier not to. Gerald did not win because he was lucky or because the universe decided to intervene on his behalf. He won because he had spent decades becoming someone who knew what to do when the numbers stopped adding up. The same mind he had applied to financial records for 3 decades, he applied to his own household. The same discipline that had made him a reliable professional was the discipline that held him steady when the people closest to him chose betrayal over honesty. If there is anything worth taking from this story, it is simply that who you are in ordinary time is who you will be when it matters. The work you do on your character before the crisis is the only preparation that counts. Renata underestimated a quiet man sitting at a kitchen table. That underestimation was the beginning of everything that followed. My father's watch is on my wrist. The house is mine. The lilacs bloomed again this spring.